All right, we are live. This is Matteo with SU Monolith. Thank everyone for coming on board. Give me 1 second here. Break this down. All righty, today's guest, we have Mark. Mark is Reignite Your Growth. He is an expert in cost reduction for your business. Cost reduction and looking at cost are extremely important for every business out there. It's something that oftentimes it's overlooked because we're so busy in doing outreach and doing marketing. But one of the most important things, obviously, is looking where your finances are and how those can certainly make you or break you. So now more than ever, especially with the times that we're in at now, looking at your costs, looking at where your money is going is crucial. Whether you're in a growth cycle or you are just grinding it, looking at your costs are crucial. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to talk a little bit about yourself, what you do, and what your company does.
Okay. Yes. Good morning, Matteo. Thank you for having me here. I am, I guess, for want of a better term, a business growth strategist. I've got 30 years of experience in the corporate world with concept development, product development, commercialization. So I developed a great understanding of being able to link everything together from marketing, the sales process, and operations. You really need to, most companies are structured functionally, obviously. My function in those organizations was to really go across function and be able to link everything together. So one of the key things that we did as we're starting to take a product from a concept and get it into the development stage is costing, and really understanding what your costs are, how they roll up, how they impact the actual finished product itself, and in getting it to market. Because until product is hitting the market and somebody is paying an invoice, it's a cost. So it really, that's my background. I now do this for companies themselves, in addition to costing, which is typically the most short-term immediate impact that you're going to have with a company. We look at, and Matteo, you and I've had discussions about the whole marketing and the effectiveness of marketing, everything from messaging to getting it digitized and the process of CRMs and so forth, and then tying that into the sales process. And now if you get all of this business, how effective are you at being able to manage it operationally? At some point, that you will find a pinch point, and it is a kind of a truth in business that you'll find a pinch point. What we look at doing is, my goal is to really look across the broad spectrum, find pinch points, before they become pain points, and then really help people to address those, help them ask a lot of good questions about how to address the situation. I don't necessarily kind of want to focus on giving answers. It's their business. They know it much better than I do.
Yeah.
But what I really look at doing is helping people ask better questions so that they can get better answers. And one of the ways that we do that is through this whole cost control process.
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about in the past was how, like, for instance, from our end, from our agency's aspect, is that we always approach a business with the understanding that business owners need to look at marketing from the concept that everything is symbiotic, right? That everything kind of works off each other. Even if we go down just to the marketing aspect, there's so many moving parts, and oftentimes people focus just on one or two things instead of looking at the whole picture and how everything kind of works together, and ignoring parts of that can certainly hurt your business. To further that, then going to step up when we see how marketing then interacts with other aspects of the business, other departments of the business. The marketing does not live in a vacuum. It crosses over into all parts of a business, whether it's the finance or logistics, purchasing. It all is interconnected, and oftentimes companies, and you'll be surprised, it's something that the concept should not be ignored regardless of the stage of the company, whether you're starting off, whether you're small to medium-sized business, or even a large corporation, is that oftentimes, well, I'm a small company, I don't need to look at all these departments separately, but there has to be a distinction and be able to understand how one affects the other. And as obviously as a company grows, there are more obstacles and hurdles that people need to overcome. And I think a specialist like yourself that is able to really understand all the spokes in a wheel, so to speak, gives great value, especially if a company is on that growth cycle where the smallest slip can cost a company a lot of money. So, what are your thoughts on the aspect that no single department is in a vacuum?
Well, we actually, I guess the best answer is how we have the first initial conversation with a client, with a business owner. We asked three main questions. First of all, what is their number one goal for their business right now? Then potentially, depending on that answer, is, are there other high priority goals as well that are tied into that may be longer term? Number two is then what do they find is standing in their way? And that usually is somewhere between 3 to 5 topics we have found. Then kind of what kind of resources in order to make that change and reach those goals and address what's standing in their way, what kind of resources do they have to be able to address that? And it's more than just motivation. You can be motivated, but if you don't have the time and the people resources and so forth to really address that, it's going to be a really tough climb. So, and in order to, so I guess in the realm of that, it's context. We're really trying to understand, what the context is for the organization, because we can get into all the different gears and so forth. And, I remember you talking about showing the gear model.
Yeah.
That's one thing, but you have to understand where to start. It's just like dealing with a lawyer or a doctor or a mechanic. You've got to understand where somebody is and a company is at a certain point in time, where they want to go. And then you start building, back to my comment about the questions, then you start building the questions to ask in order to come up with the answers to guide you, into the solution itself. Because you can run through bullet points, but if it's in a vacuum, it's not of value.
Right. One of the things that I've noticed is that, even from my past experiences being a consultant, is that oftentimes when I was brought on board to scale a business or to get a company into a new market, one of the things that I felt myself being drawn to first is what are your costs, right? What has been working, what hasn't? Let's talk about marketing tomorrow, but let's first today talk about where your money is, where it's going, where your costs, because I think that is obviously undertaking a task of making a company more solid and being able to set its foundation correctly to make it grow, is really understanding is, let's go for the path of least resistance. Where's your money being spent, and is it being spent in the right way? And my experience has been that oftentimes that is the first task, because it's one of those tasks that is right there. It's right on in front of us, and saying, okay, you know what? You are spending way too much here. You're doing not enough there. before even starting new initiatives or the process of creating new initiatives, looking where their company stands as far as their expenses is really the first thing that I personally do. Do you find that also the case with when you approach a company? Granted, there's a lot of things to qualify, like you said, your questionnaire, really understanding where they're coming from. By my experience is that, let's tackle first where you're doing with your expenses, and see how we can reduce those, because those seem to be the ones that are the easiest to manage right away.
We will get into a discussion about marketing and their positioning and so forth, but when you get moving into a project, it's costs first.
Yeah.
Let's see where your costs are. And it's not necessarily um, a one fix, 6 weeks and you're done. This can be an ongoing process because you have
Right.
contracts, you have bidding that you have to do. There's a lot of different dynamics.
Mhm.
But one of the things that we look at is with costs is, does it acquire a client? Does it keep a client? Does it improve the yearly value of a client?
Mhm.
And does it support core operations?
Mhm.
If it
Mhm.
doesn't, why is that why is it there? So you really have to, it's a challenge process of you've got to put that cost, whether it's fixed or variable, you've got to put it into one of those four buckets. And if it's not, that needs to be set off to the side, and you really have to challenge whether it's still, whether it's still a viable and necessary expense, either temporarily or permanently.
Right.
And one of the things that we look at, because most people will look at their costs in a roll up. So
Mhm.
they get all these costs and then they dump it into the variable and they dump it into the fixed, and it kind of builds up. It's like it's like a house. It's like building the foundation,
Mhm.
and that's how that the costs continue to swell over time.
Right.
What we look at is a concept called spend down,
Mhm.
where you set a budget. And let's just, for example, say we want to reduce costs over across the board by 5%. You take your existing number, you multiply that by 95%. That's your target. Now, everything that you're spending, you challenge against that spend down. So
Mhm.
instead of building up, you're breaking this down. And what you get to see is, as you get closer and closer to that figure, you get more, the owner gets more and more selective about whether that cost needs to remain or not. So
Right.
it's the spending down versus the building up concept. And it sounds so simple, but it's a different mentality when you really start to challenge, you know, why is this here? And, or it's increased exponentially here in the last couple of years. Is there a better option that doesn't compromise quality or consistency?
Let me ask you this something, Mark. Oftentimes, there is the concept of this ideology that a small business needs to stop thinking like a small business if they want to grow. One of those classic examples, this is something that has been I've seen a lot in discussion groups, is that a small business that is in a growth cycle needs to start adhering to guidelines and self imposing policies when it comes to their cost. Case in point, I'll give an example. A company, small, maybe a family owned business that is on a growth cycle, instead of saying, well, you know what, the money that I'm making, I'm putting aside for a family vacation, as opposed to saying, well, you know what, my 5% of gross sales should go to marketing or other things. Do you find that happening? There's kind of like a dilemma, I'm a small business, I'm a family owned business. I want to take my profits, I want to take my gains and use it for my family's use. And that's fine and dandy. But if you're in a growth cycle and you want to take it to the next step, there are some limitations that prohibit you, at least if you really want to scale up, that you need to stop thinking as a small business and start implementing more of a medium-sized business, finance concepts. Is that something that you find with small businesses?
You you've got to treat everything with a line item.
Mm-hmm.
You absolutely have to, and that includes paying yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you don't suddenly decide to double your electric bill
Mm-hmm.
or your rent. You don't suddenly decide to then pay yourself double. It's the same concept.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Especially in scaling,
Mm-hmm.
for most businesses, typically you're going to find that you're going to need personnel. You're
Mm-hmm.
going to need personnel trained. You're going to need various resources that you may not need right now, but you're going to need those kind of to invest in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Spending money for personal, for you personally, more than you've budgeted, takes away from that. So you're
Mm-hmm.
not it's kind of like, running on, you start running on empty.
Right.
And it can be it can really be a short runway to
Mm-hmm.
have that, where it's great to have the vacation and the time away and clear your head and spend time with the family, which is why
Mm-hmm.
you're doing this business anyway.
Sure.
But the business, you have to understand where your priorities are. And when you're running a small business, you're not only responsible for you and your family, but your employees
Of course.
and potentially your customers. Sometimes that can get lost in the myriad of what an owner has to take on. So
Right.
it really is important to stick to that, and particularly now when retention, acquisition and retention of employees is so critical right now. It's one thing that I've seen a lot of my clients focus on, is if they can free up money, that typically means they're going to move it over towards either developing existing employees, potentially getting new employees, because right now it's a problem that is probably as acute as I've ever seen it.
Yeah.
Just finding employees, and it's not necessarily just management, though you can do a lot of career development, but it's just getting employees. And you had mentioned as well about policies and procedures, even just standardizing simple things like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
um, it lets people know what's expected. And that is one of the things that most employees really value, much more than people give credit for, is consistency. I know
Right.
what to expect. Things are standardized. It's not just a fire drill every day.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's crucial. This is something that we also ourselves see, and we don't get involved too much into finances. We get involved into marketing, and oftentimes we will see that in those crucial period where the small business is on the verge of taking it to the next level, either because they've got new contracts or they're expanded their market share or they're getting into new markets. And at that point in time, we feel that it's very crucial, not from just a marketing perspective, but also from a internal infrastructure, to start thinking like the next level, which is, like you mentioned, implementing policies, implementing things that now you're going into the next category, and the things that you could have maybe closed an eye and kind of brushed it under the rug will no longer work. And in fact, now that you're on a much greater scale, they can also certainly hinder you. And we've seen this happen a lot with a lot of our clients, is where they're right on the verge of really scaling, maybe going from a 6 to 7 figure company, and we tell them, look, you really need to now look at where you're at, where you're spending your money, and start implementing procedures, because what was once working for you and what you could have partially ignored, you no longer have that luxury, because the numbers are greater. You're probably employing more people. You're facing a lot more challenges, and often that's something that we warn, at least we try to guide our clients in saying, you know what, okay, you're growing, you're getting more sales. What are you doing? We're helping you on the marketing aspect, but what are you doing internally to grow with that marketing growth, right? So I think that's something that is oftentimes overlooked, and I think that's where an expert like yourself that certainly is able to see from an internal perspective, aligning their internal dilemmas with that growth. I think that's so important. You know?
And it's, I had mentioned about the, acquisition, keeping a client, the yearly value of a client, core operations. Any expense you have, it's either compounding.
Hmm.
It's got a compounding factor. So if you spend a dollar, you make two, for
Hmm.
example, or it becomes a sunk cost. You really want to minimize those sunk costs that, it's spent. I mean, even core operations, what is to core operations? What's an expense for a core operation? Is it, a lot of people, you really start to change the definition of what is a core expense when you start to take a really close look at that, particularly in that spend down process.
Hmm.
Whatever it might be, it could be subscriptions, it could be cable subscriptions, it could be, who knows what it could be. I mean,
Right.
sometimes stuff just comes out of the woodwork, but you've really got to understand and appreciate the compounding factor of that. And for example, if you take just a 5% across the board decrease in both fixed and variable expense, what does that hit for profit? What is the profit impact of that? And the average American business runs around a 7 to 8% profit.
Hmm.
Um, and if you if you take that increase to say $10,000, and you $10,000 increase doesn't sound like much, but you divide that by your profit margin of say 8, and then you
Right.
multiply that by 100. That's the equivalent revenue that you'd need to generate to
Hmm.
realize that profit. So there's a really profound, and that's one process that I go through with people is, if we were to do this, here is the impact that you have, not only on your bottom line, but what it's really doing to your top line. It changes the nature of their business.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. At this point in time, I want to offer, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments. If you're on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, feel free to add comments, questions, and Mark and I will be more than happy to answer any of them towards the end of the stream. One thing that I think, as far as takeaways, I mean, you being a startup, and I know most of your clients tend to be already established businesses, but as a startup, because a lot of our audiences are in the startup phase, what are some of the things that they should be extremely conscious from a cost perspective or from a structural perspective when starting a business, or perhaps they've started a business, they're growing. What are some of the things they should really be keeping an eye on?
Uh, I think the three areas that I really focus on, and it's particularly critical in the startup phase is, and we've talked about this, what's your digital, I call it a digital audit.
Right.
What is your digital expense? Because that is something that can easily, start to get out of control, and then what are your metrics as far as your return on that investment? Is that a good return? How does that tie into, your SEO process or
Yep.
your pay per click? And then how does that tie into your CRM? A lot
Yeah.
of that, and it's what you address with your company, is you tie it together.
Right.
What a lot of people will do is, kind of cobble a system together, and it becomes extremely expensive. It's tough to tie together. It takes a lot of maintenance. Nobody gets paid, to run a company to maintain their digital system.
Right.
Others get paid, but they don't.
Right.
The other thing is looking at your human resource and people expense. Is that in line in your insurance expense? Insurance has crept up a lot since COVID, and looking at that, challenging that, because that's a highly competitive business. You don't have to compromise quality or service or consistency to probably get better coverage for sometimes a good bit less.
Mhm.
And then, depending on your industry, merchant services. I mean, merchant
Mhm.
services that's changed dramatically now, where you can pass through that so that you're not, it basically it can be a free service for you, and it's passed on to the client. So,
Hmm.
those areas are areas that a lot of people don't think about, but
Hmm.
I really focus on the digital, because pretty much anybody in business is going to spend something digitally, whether it's just a website, but usually it's a lot more than that, because COVID's really kind of forced that digital age on us. So what are you getting for what are you spending?
Yeah, I mean, definitely having your KPIs, having all your metrics in place, and especially in the beginning, well, and actually in any part of a business cycle, no one in today's market has the luxury to just set it and forget it. Being able to keep monitoring performance, whether it's an external marketing initiative or even internal spending, is crucial, especially in the beginning, where unfortunately we see it all the time, where a company startup has, through fault of really no one, but they've made a wrong decision, or they spent too much money on an initiative, and not thinking it through. Unfortunately, eating up their reserve or their initial capital investment, and then not even being able to survive the first year. It's very easy nowadays to, because I think that the barriers to entry are have been dropped so much, and that everyone pretty much can get into the game, especially when it comes to e-commerce. Um, there's a lot of disappointing people out there, where they've taken their money, their hard-earned money, and they've been spoon-fed all these promises, be a millionaire in 30 days or less kind of thing, and they're paying for courses and all these things that are in fact, I just posted an article regarding that marketing is one of those industries that there's really no certification. We talk about lawyers passing the bar exam and doctors getting their medical degree. You have individuals that watch a couple of YouTube videos and do a flashy video, and then market themselves as marketing gurus. Charging a couple of $1,000s a month in classes, and unfortunately, it's an industry that's not really regulated, and I hear horror stories, people where they've spent their hard-earned money, instead of going into to experts like us that have been doing this for a long, long time, that have the experience, have the knowledge. Are very, people tend to be very impulsive. I don't know if it's if it's more of a social stigma that people have this fear of missing out, or they've been pressured into to making millions right away in their lifetime kind of situation, and it's hurting. And like I said, I hear horror stories of people that have burned their life savings going down these paths, and then they come to us and saying, look, please help us out, because we've made some bad decisions. And unfortunately, it's one of those things that oftentimes the experts like us are thrown into the mix of a lot of people, and people are not making their due diligence. They don't do their research. They don't really check references. They just want to jump into it, because it's been made so easy to jump into the business world, as opposed to something like 30, 40 years ago. So this is something that I think, I'm a big advocate on telling, look, you don't have to talk to us, but make sure to whoever you talk to, they have the experience, they have the knowledge, and there's no shame in the game in checking for references, and making sure that your hard-earned money goes to the right hands, because otherwise it will destroy your business.
And that ties into a lot of what I do. Um, we use assessments a lot, where we're trying to get an understanding of the baseline of where they are. But tied into that is asking good
That's
questions to
right.
get good answers. And this is particularly the case in, as you said, marketing, but also digital.
Yeah,
Is they go on faith. They're
exactly.
going because they're being told by who's ever trying to pitch them that this is going to work and here's all the things we could do, they don't really have a lot of questions to ask.
Mm-hmm.
What I provide is, and I really try to stay away from giving people answers. I will give them guidelines and fairly detailed guidelines on questions you should ask and things that you should challenge, potentially a scenario to really understand how somebody would operate, somewhat in a lot of cases to pull up red flags
Yeah.
with people on, if you're not getting, if you're talking to somebody, potential supplier, and you get 3 or 4 answers that just aren't matching, probably need to look for the next, the next person. It saves a lot of time. Is it work? Yes, it's a lot of work to untie,
Yep.
a bad arrangement, a bad situation.
Yeah.
So, I always say that get better questions. Better questions, you get better answers.
Yep.
And it also, it builds the rapport. It builds that, as you said, it's really part of the due diligence. But a lot of people really don't know what questions to ask.
Yeah.
And over years and years, and with thousands of, we have this database of questions, and AI can be extremely useful in this area.
Yeah.
If you ask it the right questions.
Correct.
And it's kind of the whole, quality in, quality out.
Yep.
And so you can, this really helps that research side of things to bring things to the forefront. The other thing, and we're both examples of that, is this kind of, the resources that are out there. There are a lot of them. There are a lot of good ones. It's much more than it's ever been in the business world. So how do you sift through that? And that's that whole questionnaire process that I put people through. And then once we get answers back, what I really, the next step I work with people is trade-offs. Well, if you went down this road, X could happen. If you go down this road, Y could happen. And so you're looking at trade-offs, because there's a saying, Thomas Sowell, an economist, said there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs.
Right.
Now, a lot of people that sell solutions don't necessarily like to hear that, but a solution is a trade-off.
Yep.
It's deciding to go down a path and, using SEO Monolith or somebody else. You've made a choice. You've made a trade-off, and you've decided to trade. They've decided to trade money for your resources.
Right.
And it is all about trade-offs. And so the questioning process, and then the understanding the trade-off process, is extremely valuable in working with people, and because it really does personalize, and it does bring back to their goals and what's standing in their way. That process supports that. It doesn't work in a vacuum. It all starts to tie together.
Yeah, one of the things that we're a big proponent of is transparency. From a customer's perspective, if you, like you mentioned before, if you're not seeing it clear, if you feel that your vendor or your marketing supplier is simply not giving you the complete picture, you got to question that, because I would rather lose a customer and tell them exactly what we can and cannot do, as opposed to a lot of these other agencies that just are just yes. That's their key word. Yes, yes, yes. Give me the money. And unfortunately, that's the case. It comes. A business is 80% logic and common sense. If we follow a common sense approach, if we're very pragmatic, if we, under promise and over deliver, that's how we kind of approach the way that we talk with the customer, a prospective client, saying, here's what it is, here's what we're likely to expect. We're very transparent. There are some things that are out of our control. There's no such thing as guarantees. This word has gotten, I think it's become a marketing tool. It always has been, but in our industry, as I'm sure like in yours, there is no guarantee. There's just too many external factors. There are guidelines, there is past information, there are precedents that we can use, there's history that we can use. but at the end of the day, there's a lot of external factors that can affect a business. So a guarantee is something that I'm always weary of, and it should be taken with a grain of salt.
And it's it ties into a lot of what we're talking about. A lot of what I offer is, I mean, the questioning, the questioning of vendors is risk management.
Hmm.
We tend to think of risk management as insurance people.
Hmm.
Well, this process gets you really good at risk management. Is it risk mitigation? Is it risk transference?
Hmm.
That's really the core of what you're looking at with cost savings. Is
Right.
yes, it's numbers, and yes, it's spreadsheets, but it's risks. Am I spending, take for example your side of the business, if
Right.
I spend this, what kind of return am I getting? And
Right.
we've talked about before the amount of money that you've been able to save people
Yep.
because they just kept stacking
Yep.
expense on stacking expense, and it
Yep.
gets to be astounding, and people think it's normal. But
Yep.
that risk management of, if you can free up a fair amount of cash each month
Right.
and get a better result,
Yep.
you have gotten some clarity on, what's going to work for you, but then also you've just eliminated that
Right.
risk.
Yeah, one of the things that we see a lot when we first do, as I'm sure you have as well, one of the first things that we see when we do a company's audit, or where they're at as far as their marketing initiatives, we're seeing, especially in PPC campaigns, where they're spending so much money and they've been stuck with that same philosophy, and it may have worked in the beginning, but again, it's the concept of set it, forget it, and walk away. And things change, market trends change, consumer behavior change, and what happens is that the results from those PPC campaigns are no longer working. Yet they're spending, continuing to spend money, and that money is going nowhere. It just becomes a money pit. And after about 6, 10, 8, 10 months or so, even a year, a lot of these companies have spent close to $500,000, if not more, in PPC campaigns that have no return. And this is drastic. And that's one of the first things that we go in, and we look, because we see that in PPC management, this is one of those things that it happens all too often, and it's something that needs to be maintained on a weekly and monthly basis to keep adjusting, because the market is adjusting all the time, right? I mean,
Right.
consumer behavior is adjusting, their products may be adjusting, and if that is not executed on a weekly, monthly basis and tweaked, and you just set it and forget it, you're going to end up spending so much money and getting no return. And that's one of those things that when we come in, like yourselves, that come in and we look at and say, you know what, I just saved you now $500,000 on a PPC marketing campaign that wasn't bringing you any sales. So that is so crucial, and oftentimes getting that extra set of eyes, external eyes, to really look at your business, both on a macro level and a granular level, uh, will certainly save you money, and then from there allow you even to now grow because of that. And unfortunately, it's something that we see just way too often. It's pretty scary, because eventually, even if you're a medium-sized company and you can take that hit, there's only so much time that you can take that hit, right? Eventually, it's gonna just come crushing down, and this is something that we see often, and we're able to correct this, and without even spending money, by saving money, you live to fight another day, so to speak.
And it goes to the old adage of know your numbers.
Hmm.
And your numbers just aren't dollar numbers. They're, in financial numbers. They can be performance numbers.
Exactly.
They can be conversion numbers. They can
Yep.
be, sales closing numbers. But
Yep.
most companies, under say about $6 to $8 million, they'll find over time they need to know about 10 numbers. So it's kind of like, senior management in a large company, they don't need to see the book. They need the one-page summary. And if
Right.
somebody can come in to a small business owner and give them one page with the key numbers that they, the
Exactly.
KPIs, as you said, here are my key numbers. Here's my sales. Here's my revenue. Here's my costs. Here's my conversions, whatever they may be. And they can change over time.
Sure.
But what that allows you to do is, if those are the important numbers, that's what you get everyone to focus on.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it becomes becomes somewhat of a self-refining process.
Yeah. I wanna pass along the information. If you want to reach Mark, again, his company is Reignite Growth Coach. A lot of services that he offers, regardless of the stage of your business, whether you're starting or you're small, growing into a medium-sized company. Mark is certainly the expert in looking at your company, not just from a marketing perspective, but as a complete picture, because that's what it is. Everything. I'm a big proponent. I think we both are a big proponent on this. That none of the segments of a business live in a vacuum. They all interact with one another. They're all fit together. And if you want an extra set of eyes that is experienced and look at this, please reach out to Mark. You have his email there. I also invite you to visit his website. There's a lot of good information there. reignitegrowthcoach.com. You can also book an appointment with him. So, Mark, thanks again. You can also reach us for all your marketing needs at SEOmonolith.com. We focus a lot on local visibility, national and local SEO, lead generation, a lot of fun stuff. If you've enjoyed this content, please feel free to comment. Mark, if there's anything else, please, a takeaway for our viewers. There's a lot of good advice I'm sure you can give, but if there was one piece of advice to give out for anyone that is starting a business or is in the process of scaling, what would be your takeaway for the day?
I think the core of what I offer is to, allow people to run the business side of their business so that they have options. Very often we get into situations where owners will get into situations where they kind of tie themselves down, and now they're just kind of, the business is running them, and they're somewhat hogtied, so they don't have options. The whole idea, the whole core of what I offer is, to simplify that, get some clarity on things, and then provide people with options. You cannot scale and you cannot go to the next level unless you have options. So, we really look at that as the ultimate end goal, because at match your goals with having options, you're in a better place than probably 95% of the
Absolutely.
other companies out there. And that alone can be a huge market differentiator for you.
Right. Mark, thank you so much for joining us today. A lot of great information you offered our viewers. We have to do this again. There's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of good information to disseminate. Hope you'll join us for another one of our podcasts. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
We really
My pleasure.
enjoyed it. Thank you, Mark.
Okay. Thanks,
Thank
Matteo.
you. Thank you.
Bye.